Have you ever been in a situation where you're pitching your prospect and everything seems to be going great? Your pitch is flowing smoothly, your prospect seems to like the product, you're dropping the price, adding on the benefits, asking to make a decision, and then comes the dreaded response. John, I really like your product, but I need to think about it. If that's you, keep watching. Hey, and welcome. Today I will be talking about the book of Jordan Belfort, The Way of the Wolf. Now, this book is about his straight line selling method, Master the Art of Persuasion, Influence, and Success. And it's basically a book that outlines a sales system. So it's more about the system than his life. I think he has another book that is more about his life, but this one is more like if you want some actual tips on how you can improve your conversion rate and how you can see more success with your sales, then this is a great book to read. So what will you find in this book? You will find several things. First of all, you will find sales tips and techniques randomly kind of spread throughout the book. You will also find like more structure of what he thinks is important in sales in general. And then he will actually give you a structure from beginning to end on how you can give form to your sales process so that you can increase your closing rates, get better clients, and increase your success in sales overall. Now, I think this is an interesting book to read because Jordan Belfort is obviously like his life is sales. He has like a lot of expertise in this area. And you can really see that when you read other books in sales, you will find some tips spread throughout the book, and you will probably say like, hey, this is interesting, and oh, maybe I didn't know that yet. But with Jordan Belfort, like, I really feel like he understands the struggles of a salesperson more than most of the sales books I've read. So I think like there's a lot of value in this book because he just understands sales and salespeople so well. Another reason why I think the book is interesting is because, obviously Jordan Belfort was in the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, and it was Leonardo DiCaprio that portrayed him, but he still got a lot of fame from that movie. And the movie is actually based upon reality. It aimed to model his life as well. And what's interesting is that at the start, when he started his journey in sales, he founded a company. He taught other people how to sell and grew his business. Basically, he tried to convince people to play the stock market in a way that would favor them. But he didn't do it in an ethical way. He just did it in a way that, maximizes his profits without necessarily paying regard to other people's feelings and like ethics. And he did actually go to jail for that for some time. He was accused of fraud and money laundering. In jail, he reflected on his actions, and in his book, his new book, The Way of the Wolf, he reflects on that ethics and explains why ethics are important. Obviously, as someone who has, his perspective and what he's been through in his life and in jail. So now in the new book, you will find actually that the methods all pay attention to ethics, and it actually pays more attention to ethics than I think most books do. Maybe, I don't know why, maybe he really reflected upon that. But it's something that's really spread throughout the book. Is like, he really says like all the time, think about ethics and think about ethics. Don't make the same mistake that I did. Now, apart from that, obviously, the system he gives is very helpful as well. And I will go through some of the tips with you here. So some of the things he talks about is he says that it's important to convince a prospect both logically and emotionally, because if you convince a prospect logically, then he will you use some kind of strategy to explain that your product really makes sense to maybe his situation or because of something he wants to achieve. Like, you have certain like strategical levers you can just pull to explain that to someone, and then someone can be, oh, well, that actually makes sense. But the problem is, if you play purely that level, you won't get someone to make a decision, because it might logically make sense, but the prospect doesn't feel like it's a good solution for him, because you also need to convince that person emotionally. Now, how do you convince someone emotionally? Well, that's a complicated topic, and he gives like several ways to do that. And I will go into those together with you. But I just wanted to explain here that if you want to convince a prospect, you need to do so both logically and emotionally. Now, someone actually makes a buying decision based off of emotions, but then they justify those emotions with logic. So if you don't handle the emotional part right, you'll never get to a buying decision, or you never get them to the point where they feel like they want to buy. But if you don't get the logic part right, then they might feel like they want to buy, but then it doesn't make sense to them. So then they're kind of conflicted and they don't do it either. So both are important. So let me go over some other things that he talks about. He talks a lot about the 3 tenths, is what he calls it. And that's basically, he says it's important to convince someone, especially if you're selling in B2B, but I think also B2C, you need to convince that prospect of both your product, you as a salesperson, and the company you're working for. So you need to convince them on 3 levels. And most salespeople, they only really work on 1 level. They only really work on the product themselves. But there's actually 2 levels which are also very important to communicate and sell to your prospect, which is you as a salesperson and the company as well. So that's what he calls the 3 tenths. Then, of course, his method is called the straight line system. And why is it called that way? Well, that's basically because the system is designed in a way that it helps you get from the beginning of the sales to the end of the sales in a straight line. Meaning that the way he describes it is you don't spiral off to Pluto, or you don't spiral off to Uranus, but you actually take the sale from the beginning to end, and you structure it in a logical way, and you keep it. You always keep it progressing. You never spiral off to Pluto or Uranus. So, so the way you do that is by taking control, which is very, very important as a salesperson. You need to take control in a good way, of course, but you still need to take control by asking intelligent questions that advance the sale in a way that you do intelligence gathering, and you just structure the sales call in a logical way, and then you present your solution. That's very short, but that's basically the straight line. What he says also is important is the first 4 seconds. So he talks a lot about that, maybe if you've seen him on YouTube. So the first 4 seconds, he says it's important to be perceived as sharp as a tack, enthusiastic as hell, and an expert in your field. So in those first 4 seconds, you need to convey all those 3 traits, because that's your first impression, and that's what will give you leverage to advance the sale and make a good impression on the customer and build a lot of rapport just with that initial impression. He also has an entire section about state management, which is basically your emotional state when you're presenting, when you're presenting the sales, and the kind of like aura you exude. Like he says there's like several states you can have. You can have a state of certainty, clarity, sincerity, and some more. But it's basically the states you're in emotionally. Are you in a strong state, or are you in a weak state? That's basically what it comes down to. And he says that is very important in sales, because the power of your state will also be the degree to which you empower and persuade your prospects. So it's very important to be positive and to feel strong and confident inside. Now, the way he does that is he has, in my opinion, is sort of like a strange way. He calls it olfactory anchoring. I think that's also like some of the methods that Tony Robbins use, and I really look up to Tony Robbins. But I think this particular method, it's something I never resonated with personally, but I know it works for some people. And what he basically suggested is that you work yourself up to a certain state. You just manufacture the state purely, because you want to manufacture it. You exercise putting yourself in that state. And once you do, you anchor it to some kind of to something, like to some kind of pattern. And what he suggests is like he had like some kind of a stick that he sniffs on, and then when he achieves that state, he took a sniff of that stick, and then basically he anchors that state to that stick, and he anchored that state by first. He didn't actually just manufacture that state. He really manufactured that state by going into some sales calls and having like a huge victory. And after he had the real victory, he anchored that state with his sniff stick. And then whenever he goes into a new sales conversation, he now takes a huge whiff of that sniff stick. And basically he gets put into that state, and it's kind of like an anchor for him. And I guess that probably works for some people. Now, a lot of you probably already are familiar with this concept, but in sales, and he also stresses this, tonality and body language are super important. And like, this is like people who are not into sales or don't think about it often think that it's just their words that matter. But no, once you're in sales, you really start to understand that the way you say things and the way you communicate with your body are, more important even than just the words you're using, because this is the way you can communicate your psyche basically, and your tonality and your body language will indicate certain things that communicate certain signals to people, both mostly on a subconscious level, and some people will also understand it consciously, but basically it communicates a lot of things about the way you really intend that message, because you could say the same message in a lot of different ways and it could mean a lot of different things. So that's why tonality and body language are super important in sales. Now, in terms of tonality, he has a chapter of it, and he basically says that it's important to practice this, and it's also important to practice several different tonalities. Some tonalities, he says, that are very important in sales is the tonality of caring about someone, the tonality of declarative as a question, which is basically a way of framing something as a way that's, asking like if this makes sense to someone. So, for example, hey, this is John from company ABC. I'm calling with regards to your conversion rate, for example, and something like that would be a declarative phrased as a question, or like formed as a question, because it kind of implies that they should kind of know you. There's a tonality of mystery and intrigue in order to create tension and interest from someone. There's a tonality of implying scarcity in your words. So saying that a product is really scarce and there's only like limited availability of it. The tonality of absolute certainty. So being very confident with your tonality. The tonality of being very sincere. The tonality of being reasonable. The tonality of money aside, what do you think about this idea? The tonality of implied obviousness, and the tonality of I feel your pain. So there are a lot of different tonalities that you need to practice, and it's hard for me to really come up with these on the spot to really give you an example of them. But as you go through your sales calls and your sales exercises, and once you're just dialoguing with prospects, you can start to feel that once you phrase something with a certain different tonality, you get a better response and a more sincere response from people. So it's really important that you practice your tonality. Super, super important for your results. The other chapter is on body language, and he doesn't talk that much on body language as he does on tonality. But basically, he says it's important for men, when you're talking to other men, to not look them, to not make direct eye contact like all the time, because that will be confrontational. Instead, approach from like a slight angle. It will be much more friendly between men. And he says it like, strangely, it's like the exact opposite for women. When you're talking to women, you want to be talking them head on. And that's also something that they want. Now, apart from that, he also says like it's important not to invade people's space and things like that. But he doesn't really go into that much depth on body language. And I think that's also because his system is more for calling than really in-person sales. But I might be wrong. Don't take my word for that. Anyway, he also goes into what he calls space lead. And this is a very, very important technique that he will use throughout the rest of the book. And this is basically when someone is responding to you in a certain state. So let's say someone is really angry or really negative or really frustrated, that you pace that and match that state as a way of building rapport and as a way of acknowledging the states and the emotions that the person in front of you is in, instead of like not doing that and just ignoring that and saying, hey, well, you shouldn't feel this way, and like kind of like going into conflicts. Instead of that, what he does is space lead. So first he acknowledges the emotion by mirroring that emotional state, by also being angry in a state, and then leading from the initial state to a state that he desires. And this, he says, this works better because you can really, it comes across better to the people you're talking to, because you acknowledge the way they feel and then you lead them to a certain solution instead of like not acknowledging how they feel at all. It's something I need to practice myself, to be honest. But I can see this being really interesting. His next chapter is on prospecting. And he first starts that chapter by explaining the difference between marketing and sales. So marketing is really of course, to get leads for a business. And then sales is to, once those leads are qualified, we then have a more extensive conversation with them to really dive into the details with our customer and see if we're a good fit for each other, basically. He goes into the details of that because some salespeople think they need to manufacture interests, and that's actually not true. You need to have the mindset of a sifter, so someone who is sifting out the gold from, basically sifting out the value from the rubbish, not someone who tries to manufacture the value out of nothing, because that's what the process is like in marketing. With marketing, we first sift out the golden nuggets, and then we hand those golden nuggets over to the sales team, because these are the actual, people that could actually become buyers. So it's important as you're prospecting and as you're in those initial stages. Actually, I think all the way through the sales, it's important, but especially in those initial stages, it's important to be a sifter and to really understand if this if you can qualify this prospect or this leads, and see if this is someone who's actually a good match for your service or for your products. And if they are, hand them over to sales. If they're not, then you can't use them. So don't try to be someone who really, if someone's really uninterested, or if someone's really uninterested or not a good fit, don't try to manufacture that desire in that person, because you're probably not doing that in a good way, and you're probably also wasting a lot of time on that. Instead, just sift through people until you find people that actually are good matches for your product or service. It's important to build a level of intensity and to have a script. And with building a level of intensity, I mean that don't ask deep personal questions right away. Start with light, open-ended questions. And then as you get more rapport and as you get more trust, you can ask more deeper questions. But basically build that up and don't go there straight away, or you're going to mess up your reports with your prospects. He also is really strong on scripts. So I personally think that scripts can be amazing as well. I also personally, I see the value in a natural style, selling scriptless as well. But he does make a very, very good argument for scripts, which is basically true. If you use a script, it's much better as a business owner because you rely on the system and not as much on the people, which gives you more control. Plus, if you have a script, you don't need to think about what you have to say. You already have a system that makes sense in front of you. All you need to do is say those words, so you don't need to think about it. And that frees up a lot of mental space for the other things that are important, which is your tonality, your connection with the client, the way you phrase things, your body language, etc. He also says it's important to have a logical path that you take the prospect to. So don't ask questions in an unstructured way that doesn't make sense. Make sure that the questions that you ask follow a logical path and build upon each other. Of course, if you're using a script, the script should already be arranged that way. It's important to dive into the pain points of the customer. And once you do that, it's important that you transition into the pitch and the close, and that you are ethical as well. And with the transition, you basically have to structure it in a way that it makes sense. So, for example, if you've went through the discovery with your prospect and your prospect told you that, hey, I'm struggling with this, and these are the things I'd like to improve, and these are my pain points, like based on what he says there, you should be able to transition into your pitch or your next step. And you can do that by taking all that information and saying like, if you feel like you're a good fit, then you could say, well, hey, John, based on the things that you told me, we should be a really good fit for you because that's exactly the type of clients we can help. For example, and if you don't feel like that, then you don't say that. But, he says like it's important to be ethical in the way you go about that. And I guess make it honest and make it appealing at the same time. The next thing he talks about is the presentation. So this is basically the pitch, and let me see what he calls it. But he doesn't talk about the pitch exclusively. He talks about the art and science of making world-class sales presentations. So he's actually talking about the presentation as a whole and not exclusively the pitch. But basically he says that charisma is very, very important. And he gives us certain example of a president. Let me see if I can find it, page 169. Bill Clinton, who apparently is a master in charisma. So he again talks about the importance of a script if you want to deliver a good presentation. He says, make sure the presentation is not front-loaded. So make sure you're not giving all the benefits at the start of your script. Make sure you're spreading that throughout your presentation because you don't want to like tell all your benefits and then ask the customer, what do you think? And then maybe he's not entirely convinced, and then you don't have any more ammunition to really, give us arguments as to why this is a great product because you already told everything. So don't front load the scripts. Instead, take it bit by bit, build it up benefit by benefit, feature by feature. And after, I think he says, after 2 paragraphs, stop and ask for confirmation in the way of like saying something that, does that make sense to you? Do you think that that would help you further? Something along those lines. Make sure it's ethical. And at the end of it, you can make your price statements and make sure that when you drop your price, you're not just giving the price itself, but you're also giving all the benefits so that you're not just like choking them and saying, hey, this is the price, and not leaving them with a positive feeling. If you add on the benefits after you drop the price, you're leaving them with a better feeling. And he also says, like, in your pitch and in your presentation, it's important to have several language patterns that make sense strategically from a marketing and product positioning perspective, and also from a personal perspective from this prospect, so that basically your presentation makes logical sense and you have good logical arguments of why this is a good fit for your prospect. Now, what's very interesting about the last chapter of Jordan Belfort's book is that the last chapter is about objection handling and what he calls confidence looping. And this is where a lot of the things we discussed earlier in the book come to life here. And like, I think this is really the last chapter gives the most value. So what will happen is after we drop our price and we ask the customer to make a decision, usually they will say something, or very often they will say something along the lines of, I need to think about it. But the problem is that objection that he's giving you, usually that's not a real objection. That's a smokescreen response, because it's just easier to say that than, going into all the details. And that's too complex for someone who is not that convinced yet. So it's just giving an easy way out. Now, what you're going to respond to that is, instead of treating that as a real objection, you're going to treat it as a smokescreen, and you're going to do pace lead. So we're going to say, I hear what you're saying, John, but does the idea make sense to you? Do you like the idea? Do you like the idea? Okay. So then John might say something like, yeah, I mean, I like the idea. And what does that really mean? What level of confidence is that tonality at? I mean, kind of like a 5 or a 6, right? At most a 6, I would say. So what we're going to do is we're going to pace lead. And that basically means that first we're going to match our customer's pace and match our customer's states and feelings. So instead of saying, yeah, John, it really is a great buy down here. In fact, one of the true beauties is that it's this, and that. Like, yeah, John, it really is a great buy down here. Like, I mean, that's disingenuous, because you're saying that in a way where you're saying that he is very confident about your product, but he didn't say that. So that's disingenuous. And instead, what you need to do is pace lead, which means that you match the feelings and the state of the customer in that moment. So if John tells us, yeah, I like the idea, then that means he's maybe at a 5 or 6, right? And we're going to pace that and then lead. So first we pace and we say to John, well, yeah, John, it really is a great buy down here. In fact, one of the true beauties of this product is that you also have this feature, and that feature. That's pacing. That's matching the state of the customer, and that's a lot more genuine than just assuming that he is purely positive, because he's not, and the customer will know that. So once we match his state and we pace that, then we lead. So we say, yeah, John, it really is a great buy down here. And in fact, you also have like this feature, and this feature. That's pacing. Now we lead, and now we go into, in fact, one of the true beauties is that you also have this feature, and that feature. Do you see what I'm saying, John? Do you like the idea? So maybe that could be framed like a little bit different and tonality could be a little bit different, but basically you are more confident and that's where you will raise the confidence of your prospect as well. And what we do then is we go over to the person. So John might say something. John's level of confidence will be raised right now, but we're going to continue. And here is where the 3 10s come in. So first we sold the product and now we need to switch to the person. So John might now be at, yeah, I kind of like the idea. So that's like a 7 or an 8, right? Or like, let's say he's at an 8 right now. So now instead of asking again, we're first going to pitch the person, the second of the 3 10s. So if I had gotten your results for the last 4 years, you probably wouldn't be saying, let me think about it. You would probably be saying, pick me up at least a double of this order. Am I right? So that way you are saying that if you've worked together with that prospect for a long time before, and if you've gotten him a lot of good results, he probably wouldn't be saying, let me think about it. He probably would be saying, yeah, hell yeah, let's do this. And usually people will agree with that because they don't know you yet. So there's a trust issue. And with that, you can actually bring that to the surface. And what you need to do, Dan, is you need to introduce yourself and pitch yourself and raise the confidence on yourself and not just the products. Then what you can also do if you're working for an external company is you can then loop that again and sell the company as well. So once you pitched both the products, the person, and the company, then you ask again for the order. And a lot of people here will say yes, but a lot of people will also say no. So what we do then is we need to now treat the objection as a real objection, because we can't pay space leads to the same degree anymore, because we would seem as we are deflecting what he's saying instead of like being genuine. So we need to treat the objection as a real objection. That's why we need to give it a rebuttal and we need to give it a pitch after that. So for example, if John says that, hey, I need to think about this, then you give a rebuttal. So, hey, John, I hear what you're saying, but like in my experience, like I have a lot of like prospects that come to me and they're a little bit hesitant of making a decision. Like they fear making that next step. And what usually happens is like they wait and keep on waiting and never make that decision. And they end up regretting their decision because they didn't make the decision and they don't get to grow their company. And then that's your rebuttal. And then you add a pitch on top of that. So John, in fact, like one of the true beauties of our product is that with our product, you will not just make more profit, but you'll also see this feature, and this benefit, right? And then you go back into pitch. So it's important to add the pitch on top of the rebuttal as well. So your next step then is to lower the action threshold, and you can do that by adding a guarantee, by adding a cooling period, by pitching more in terms of like, what's the worst that could happen here? So really saying that like, this is not a big decision, or this doesn't really have any much risk for you. Of course, be ethical in that. But you're basically trying to lower their action threshold, like making this like a small step, not a big step. And if they still say no, you can increase their pain. So for example, saying that, John, you've been in this situation for the last year now. You haven't grown your business. You're still at the point you're in. Like, how much longer are you going to do this? And then you also add a pitch, and you future pace, and you make their pain worse by really explaining to them what will happen if they don't take action and they stay in the situation that they're in for the next 5 years. And then you add another pitch on top of that, and then you ask again for the order. And then basically, if you do all that well, he says that you should be seeing a lot higher closing rates. You should be seeing a very good closing rates. But that depends on how well you master the techniques and how well you can execute all that. Some customers, some prospects will still say no. And, he says that you just kind of I guess let some people go because they might not ever make a decision anyway. But yeah, this is my review on the book The Way of the Wolf, and I hope you enjoyed this review and got some valuable information out of it. If you enjoyed this video or you learned something, please give this a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. And please tell me in the comments, are you working on something on your sales? Maybe you're working on your sales pitch or you're working on your rebuttals. Like, it would be really interesting to hear from you. Anyway, I hope you have a good one and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.